Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, in our ongoing study in Malachi. And even though we have completed our study of Malachi, we're going to look at a postscript lesson because it ended with a postscript. Now we're going to have a postscript lesson on the coming of Elijah, which will help to explain the very short chapter 4. So let's go to block 1, and we're going to examine the scriptures for double reference to the coming of Elijah. We begin with Luke 1:17. He will go before the Lord in the spirit of Elijah to turn the hearts of parents to their children, the disobedient to wisdom, creating a people prepared for the Lord. This is Luke quoting Malachi 4, 5, and 6. Then Matthew 17, 11, and 12, where Christ is speaking. But I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, and did to him whatever they pleased. And of course, that is Christ speaking of John the Baptist. And then John 1:21. When John the Baptist is questioned by the Sadducees and Pharisees, "Are you Elijah?" And he said, "I am not." And now the later prophecy of Revelation 11:3. And I will give power unto my 2 witnesses, and they shall prophesy. That is the coming of the true Elijah at the final day of judgment in the book of Revelation. Now the idea of double blessing comes from Deuteronomy 21:17, where the firstborn was always given a double portion of inheritance. But what we learn from the scriptures is that there is a early fulfillment of the Malachi prophecy, and there's going to be a later fulfillment of the Malachi prophecy. There was a fulfillment in John the Baptist, who came in the spirit of Elijah, and then there's going to be the true Elijah who comes in the day of the Lord, the great and terrible day of the Lord of final judgment in Revelation. So there is scripture basis for this idea of the law of double reference. Now, block 2, we take a look at the scholarly support for the law of double reference. Dr. David Cooper, it is the double fulfillment of prophecy seen many times in the writings of the prophets. He uses Isaiah 11, 11, and 12 about the regathering of Israel. And there was a regathering after the Babylonian exile, and there was a second regathering after the worldwide dispersion. So, an earlier and a later. So what we're talking about, if you look at block 2, note 3, is a prophetic gap from McCollum and Lashman. The prophet predicts one event followed by a later event after a prophetic gap. The predictive material referring to the later event will not fit the earlier event, just as John the Baptist does not fit the later great and terrible day in the book of Revelation. Now the law of double reference, it was debated as early as 350 to 428 AD, and Bernard Ram, the Protestant scholar of hermeneutics, supported this hermeneutical principle. And I remember when I went to Dallas Baptist University and took my hermeneutics class, the text we used was the Bernard Ram text. Very conservative, very, very extremely conservative hermeneutics. And from his perspective, he supported the idea of the law of double reference concerning prophecy in the Bible. But it has been something debated. I mean, it was a debated issue in early church history. but it definitely is evident in the calling of Elijah and in the prophecy of the coming of Elijah. This double reference is very, very evident. It's definitely John the Baptist who came in the spirit of Elijah, but when he was questioned, "Are you Elijah?" in John 1:21, he said, "No, I am not Elijah. I came to make a straight path for the coming of the Lord." But in Revelation 11, it is prophesied that the true Elijah will appear in the day of the coming of the Lord, the day of the Lord of hosts, the day of final judgment. Now, something to remember also is block 3, the fact that we need to discuss this concept of a false prophet, because this applies to Elijah also. Block 3, Revelation 13:11 through 18. The false prophet will deceive the people by counterfeiting Elijah's miracle of calling down fire from heaven. Look at Revelation 13:13. He makes fire come down from heaven in the sight of men. However, the false prophet receives his power from Satan. Now, we go to 1 John 4:1, and John, the Apostle John, knew all about the Antichrist, and he knew all about false prophets, and he says, "Test the spirits because of the presence of false prophets. Do not become a part of the Antichrist." And remember, the Antichrist is a plurality. John describes the Antichrist as a plurality because he describes the Roman emperors as Antichrist. He describes the Gnostics as Antichrist. Antichrist, for the Apostle John, is a plurality, not a single person. Antichrist is many. But the true Elijah returns in Revelation chapter 11 as one of the two witnesses preaching the gospel and proclaiming judgment. And the two witnesses will minister for 3.5 years, which mirrors 1 Kings 17:1, Elijah's length of the drought. So when we read passages like Malachi chapter 4 verses 5 and 6, we can most assured, and also chapter 3:1, we can see in Malachi a prophecy of a double reference. There will be a early fulfillment in the one who comes in the spirit of Elijah, and there will be a later fulfillment in the actual Elijah coming in the great and terrible day of the Lord of hosts, the Almighty Pantocrator. And so there's a prophetic gap between the two fulfillments. But we have scripture support for this idea, we have scholarly support for this idea, and even the false prophet mimics Elijah. So this lesson really is to be linked to the lesson we just finished, lesson 5, on chapter 4 of Malachi, and this further explains that prophetic law of double reference. It goes way back in early church history. It really did occur in 350 to 450 AD. Very, very much it was a debated hermeneutical principle, but even today, like I said, when I went through my undergrad studies, Bernard Ramm was our text for hermeneutics class, because I went to a very, very conservative Southern Baptist college for my undergrad, and Bernard Ramm was our text. And he did support the hermeneutical principle of the law of double reference concerning prophecy. And so I respect that. I do respect that. But I think that we most assuredly can see the one who came in the spirit of Elijah as John the Baptist. Absolutely, that is the case. John the Baptist came in the spirit of Elijah. But he told the scribes and Pharisees, the Sadducees and the Pharisees, I'm not the actual Elijah. I come to clear a straight path for the coming of the Lord. And now the coming of the Lord and the baptism of Jesus Christ, that's not a great and terrible day. That's a great and wonderful day. The great and terrible day is the day in Revelation, the Lord of hosts coming in as the Almighty Pantocrator, which means Almighty in Greek. And that will be the appearing of the two witnesses, and it is believed that the two witnesses are the same two witnesses as on the Mount of Transfiguration, Moses and Elijah, the actual Elijah. And in other words, the law and the prophets, Moses and Elijah. But this is just a mini postscript, very brief, but I wanted to offer this as a supplement to the lesson number 5, where we concluded with chapter 4. This gives you a little bit more information for understanding that chapter 4 of Malachi. And again, it is a hinge document between the Old and the New Testament, and so this gives you a little bit more information to actually be enjoined with the previous lesson. So that's going to wrap up our little postscript on the coming of Elijah, and that will conclude our study of Malachi using the Septuagint and the commentary by Duguid.